The sorting chamber hummed with that particular frequency that made Instructor Vex's tendrils ache. 347 students stood in neat rows, their various appendages, limbs, and sensory organs all pointing toward the assessment sphere. This was it, the moment that would determine their entire academic trajectory at the Galactic Combat Institute. Vex had been doing this for 23 cycles now, and he could usually predict the rankings within the first 10 minutes. The Krolith students always scored high in raw strength. The Sivari excelled at tactical analysis. The Morpheans dominated the adaptability tests. It was all very predictable, very orderly, very boring. Then there was the human. She stood near the back, 5th row from the left, wearing the standard-issue training suit that somehow looked awkwardly sized on her frame. Her name was Maya Torres, according to the roster, and she was the only human in the entire incoming class. Vex had heard rumors about humans joining the Institute, but he had dismissed them as administrative errors. Surely the Council wouldn't actually accept a species from a Class 3 planet? A world that hadn't even achieved faster-than-light travel on their own? But here she was, breathing oxygen like some kind of primitive, her skin an unremarkable shade of brown, her hair pulled back in what his datapad called a ponytail. How utterly mundane. "Attention, recruits!" Vex projected his voice across the chamber, letting his authority seep into every syllable. The assessment sphere will now measure your base capabilities: strength, speed, reflexes, tactical thinking, energy manipulation, and combat potential. Do not attempt to deceive the sphere. It knows when you hold back, and it knows when you exaggerate. Your ranking will determine your class placement, your training regimen, and ultimately, your career prospects in galactic defense. The students shifted nervously. Good. Fear kept them sharp. The assessment began with the Krolith, as tradition demanded. The largest species always went first, a holdover from the old warrior codes. Massive creatures of muscle and chitin, they approached the sphere one by one, placing their primary manipulators against the gleaming surface. Numbers flickered across Vex's display. Solid rankings, mostly in the upper quartiles. Exactly as expected. The Sivari went next, their crystalline bodies refracting light as they interfaced with the sphere through pure thought. Impressive tactical scores, decent physical marks. Standard. Hours passed. The sun outside the Institute's transparent dome moved across the purple sky of Acadius Prime. Students were ranked, sorted, and assigned. Some celebrated quietly. Others hung their heads in disappointment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it was the human's turn. Maya Torres walked forward with a gait that Vex's cultural database labeled as confident, though he suspected it was actually ignorance of how poorly she would perform. She placed both hands on the sphere, and the device began its analysis. The numbers came in slowly at first. Strength? Below average. Not just below the class average, but below the minimum recommended threshold for combat training. Her lifting capacity was laughable compared to a Kroleth's. Speed? Mediocre. Her reaction time was better than her strength, but nothing that would save her in actual combat. Tactical thinking? The sphere took an unusually long time on this one, and Vex watched the metric fluctuate wildly before settling on adequate. Barely adequate. Energy manipulation? 0. Absolutely 0. The human possessed no innate ability to channel the fundamental forces. She couldn't project force fields, couldn't manipulate gravity, couldn't even generate a basic plasma discharge. The final ranking appeared on Vex's display. 347 out of 347. Dead last. The human had scored lower than a Quelp, and Quelps were primarily evolved for record-keeping and administrative tasks, not combat. This was unprecedented. This was embarrassing. This was going to be a bureaucratic nightmare. Maya removed her hands from the sphere and looked up at the display showing her ranking. Her face did something that Vex's database identified as a grimace, followed quickly by a shrug. She didn't seem particularly upset about coming in last place, which somehow made it worse. Didn't she understand the implications? "Torres! Maya!" Vex called out, his voice echoing across the now silent chamber. Every student was watching. "Your ranking places you in... He checked his datapad again, hoping the numbers had changed. They hadn't. "You will be placed in remedial combat training, Section R7. Report to Subsection Gamma tomorrow, at 0600. "Got it," the human said, her voice carrying an odd inflection that the translator struggled with. Was that sarcasm? Vex couldn't tell. She walked back to her assigned spot, and Vex noticed something interesting. Despite ranking last, despite the humiliation of being the weakest student in the entire class, she walked with her head up, her shoulders back, her pace steady. Either she was incredibly dense, or she genuinely didn't care about the social implications of her failure. The other students whispered among themselves. Vex caught fragments of their conversations through his sensory array. The word human was repeated often, usually followed by variations of primitive, weak, or his personal favorite. Why is she even here? Vex dismissed the class and retired to his office, a modest space overlooking the Institute's training grounds. He poured himself a glass of Vrexian amber, the strong stuff that made his tendrils numb, and pulled up Maya Torres's file on his workstation. Born on Earth, third planet in a yellow dwarf system. Age, 22 Earth years, equivalent to roughly 17 standard cycles. Previous education, various. Institutions on her homeworld, none of particular note. No combat training beyond something called high school gym class, which appeared to involve running in circles and hitting balls with sticks. No genetic modifications, no cybernetic enhancements, no military background whatsoever. So why was she here? Vex scrolled further down the file until he found the acceptance letter. It had been signed by Counselor Thrain himself, one of the most respected military strategists in the galaxy. The letter was brief. Accept this candidate. Special provisions authorized under Exploratory Species Protocol. Further details classified. Classified. Wonderful. That meant Vex couldn't even request more information without triggering a security review. He finished his drink and decided to forget about the human for the evening. She would wash out of the program within a month. Maybe 2 if she was stubborn. The remedial sections were designed to help marginal students improve, but there was only so much you could do with such limited raw material. Some species simply weren't cut out for galactic combat, and humans apparently numbered among them. The next morning arrived with the typical efficiency of military institutions. Vex oversaw the standard classes, taught a seminar on tactical assault patterns, and tried very hard not to think about the human ranked last in her year. But then the report came in from the remedial section. Instructor Grax, who oversaw Section R7, had requested an immediate meeting. That was unusual. Grax was a Krolith, built like a small mountain, and in 15 years of teaching, he had never once requested a meeting with Vex. Vex found him in the observation deck overlooking Training Ground 7, where the remedial students were running basic exercises. Grax stood with all 4 arms crossed, his massive head tilted in what Vex recognized as confusion. "What's the problem?" Vex asked, joining him at the railing. "The human," Grax rumbled, his voice like rocks grinding together. "She is unexpected." "How so?" "I reviewed her assessment scores. She's the weakest student we've ever admitted." "Physically, yes, absolutely. She cannot lift even a quarter of what my weakest Krolith student can manage. Her muscle density is pathetic. Her bone structure seems designed to break under stress. Then what's the issue? Grax pointed down to the training ground with one massive hand. Watch her. Vex followed his gesture and spotted Maya Torres immediately. She was on the obstacle course, a relatively simple setup designed to test basic agility and problem-solving. The course included climbing walls, balance beams, rope swings, and various barriers. Maya was currently struggling with a climbing wall that most students could scale in under 30 seconds. She had made 3 attempts and kept sliding back down, her hands unable to find proper purchase on the smooth surface. Objectively, it was painful to watch, but she kept trying. 4th attempt. 5th. On the 6th try, she changed her approach, using the seams between panels instead of trying to grip the flat surface. She made it halfway up before her arms gave out, and she fell back to the padded floor. 7th attempt. This time she succeeded, hauling herself over the top through what appeared to be pure stubbornness. Persistence is admirable, Vex admitted, but it doesn't change her fundamental limitations. Keep watching, Grax insisted. The next obstacle was a rope swing across a pit. Most students simply grabbed the rope and swung across. Maya stared at the rope for a full minute, then at the pit, then back at the rope. Then she walked 20 paces back, sprinted forward, grabbed the rope at the last possible second, and used her momentum to carry herself across in a wild, ungainly arc that somehow worked. That's not how that obstacle is supposed to be solved, Vex said. Exactly. The pattern continued. Every obstacle that required raw strength, Maya failed or barely succeeded. But every obstacle that could be solved through alternative methods, she found a way. When she couldn't climb over a barrier, she found a gap to squeeze through. When she couldn't jump across a gap, she located a narrow point and used a running start. It was inefficient, it was inelegant, it was completely unorthodox, but it was working. She finished the course, Grax said, checking his chronometer. Dead last in her group, but she finished. All of her group mates are physically stronger, faster, more capable. But 3 of them gave up. And this concerns you because I threw everything in the training manual at her this morning. Basic strength drills? She failed them all, but kept trying until the time limit expired. Combat forms? She couldn't execute a single one properly, due to her limited strength and flexibility. Weapons handling? She could barely lift a standard plasma rifle. So she's terrible at everything. I don't see the problem. Grax turned to face Vex directly, and there was something unsettling in his expression. She smiled through all of it. Every failure, every embarrassment, every moment where the other students laughed at her performance. She smiled, made some comment that the translator flagged as self-deprecating humor, and tried again. Vex, in 15 years of teaching, I have never seen a student rank dead last and still show up to afternoon training with that kind of attitude. Vex felt something twist in his midsection. Not concern exactly. More like curiosity. Perhaps she doesn't understand how badly she's performing? I showed her the rankings. She laughed. Actually laughed. Then she asked if there were extra training hours available. And are there? I told her the gym is open until 2200 hours. Let me guess, she's there right now? Grax nodded. Vex checked his chronometer. It was barely past 1800 hours. The human had finished her regular training at 1700 and had immediately sought out more. That was either dedication or insanity, and Vex wasn't sure which possibility disturbed him more. Keep me informed of her progress, Vex said finally, or lack thereof. 3 weeks passed. Maya Torres remained ranked last in her class. This did not change. This could not change, because the assessment sphere's initial rankings were based on baseline capabilities, and humans simply did not possess the baseline capabilities to compete with the other species at the Institute. But something else changed. Vex started receiving reports from other instructors. The human was showing up early to every class. She stayed late at every training session. She asked questions constantly, filling dozens of pages with notes in her native script. She couldn't execute the techniques properly, but she studied them with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. More interestingly, she started talking to the other remedial students. Not just talking, but encouraging them. The Quelp student who had been ready to transfer to an administrative program, Maya had spent 2 hours teaching him alternative grip techniques for his 3-fingered hands. The Morphean who struggled with maintaining form under stress, Maya had suggested breathing exercises from something called yoga, which apparently worked. The remedial section's collective performance was improving. Not because Maya was pulling her weight, she still ranked at the absolute bottom, but because she was somehow elevating everyone around her. "It's bizarre," Instructor Kelvin reported during the monthly faculty meeting. "She fails at everything individually, but her presence makes the group succeed. I've never seen anything like it." "Perhaps we should consider transferring her to a support role," Instructor Vex suggested. "Morale officer, maybe? Or administrative support?" "No," Grax said firmly. "She requested combat training. She deserves the chance to complete combat training." "Even though she'll never pass the final assessment?" Vex pressed. "The final requires students to demonstrate combat effectiveness. She can't even lift a standard weapon properly." "Then she'll fail," Grax said. "But she'll fail having tried." Vex had stayed silent throughout this exchange, but now he spoke up. "Has anyone actually asked the human why she's here? Why she requested admission to a combat institute when she clearly lacks the physical capabilities?" The room fell silent. "I'll talk to her," Vex said finally. He found Maya in the gym that evening, as Grax had predicted. She was attempting to bench press what looked like 1/10 of what a Krolith her size would lift, and struggling. Her face was red, her arms shaking, her breath coming in short gasps. She managed 3 repetitions before her arms gave out. She racked the weight, sat up, and noticed Vex standing nearby. "Instructor Vex," she said, grabbing a towel and wiping sweat from her face. "Is something wrong?" "I want to understand something," Vex said, moving closer. "You must realize by now that you are not physically suited for combat training. Your species lacks the natural advantages that every other species here possesses. You cannot win in direct confrontation. You will always be at a disadvantage." Maya nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know. Then why are you here?" She was quiet for a moment, staring at the weights she had just struggled with. Then she looked up at Vex with those odd, forward-facing eyes that humans possessed. "Because someone has to be first," she said simply. "First what?" "First human at this institute. First human to try. Maybe I'll wash out. Probably I'll wash out. Let's be honest. But someone had to be the one to try, and if I quit, it'll be even harder for the next human who wants to attempt this. So I keep showing up. I keep trying. I fail better than I did yesterday." "That's not a strategy. That's just stubborn refusal to accept reality." Maya grinned, and Vex realized that humans could show a lot of emotion with just their mouths. "You say potato, I say potato." The translator struggled with that phrase and gave up. "Look," Maya continued, standing up and facing Vex directly. Even though he towered over her by a good meter, she didn't seem intimidated. "I know I'm not going to win any strength competitions. I know I'm probably going to spend my entire time here ranked last. But humans, we've got this thing. This weird thing where the worse the odds get, the more stubborn we become. It's probably a flaw, honestly. but it's worked out for us so far. A flaw that worked out. That's a contradiction. Welcome to humanity. We're basically one big contradiction wrapped in determination and held together with spite. Vex didn't understand half of what she had just said, but he found himself intrigued. The final assessment is in 6 months. You will be required to demonstrate combat capability against a live opponent. Based on your current progress, you will fail. Probably, Maya agreed cheerfully. But I've got 6 months to get less terrible, so I'm going to use them. She turned back to the weights, repositioned herself on the bench, and started another set. Vex watched for a moment longer, then left the gym. He had reports to file, schedules to organize, other students to worry about. But he kept thinking about what the human had said. Someone has to be first. The weeks continued to pass. Maya Torres remained ranked 347 out of 347. Her test scores were still abysmal. Her physical capabilities remained far below acceptable standards. But she showed up every single day. And then came the incident with the Hammer of Burden. The hammer was an ancient weapon, or perhaps not a weapon at all. No one was entirely sure. It had been discovered on a dead world in the outer reaches, sitting in the center of a ruined temple, surrounded by inscriptions in a language that predated most known civilizations. The hammer was roughly 2 meters long, made of a metal that defied analysis, and possessed one unique property. It was impossibly heavy. Not heavy in the sense that it was dense, though it was that too. Heavy in the sense that it seemed to pull at reality itself. Gravitational sensors went haywire around it. Touching it felt like trying to lift a collapsed star. The strongest Krolith warriors couldn't budge it. Morphians who could alter their body density to lift incredible weights found it immovable. Even mechanical assistance failed. The hammer simply refused to be lifted by anyone. It had become something of a tradition at the Institute. Every year, during the midterm evaluation period, the hammer was put on display in the main courtyard. Students would attempt to lift it, knowing full well that no one ever had and no one ever would. It was a lesson in humility, in accepting that some challenges were simply insurmountable. Vex was supervising the midterm evaluations when he noticed Maya Torres standing in line with the other students, waiting her turn to attempt the hammer. "Torres," he called out, "you don't have to do this. The hammer is an optional demonstration." She turned and smiled at him. "I know, but everyone else is trying. Seems rude not to. You'll just embarrass yourself. If the strongest students in the Institute cannot move it, what makes you think?" "Oh, I definitely can't move it," Maya interrupted. "But like I said, seems rude not to try." Vex decided not to argue. Let her fail along with everyone else. At least this failure would be shared with her peers. The line moved forward. Krolith students attempted the lift with all 4 arms, straining until their chitin cracked from the effort. Sivari tried to use tactical leverage points, achieving nothing. Morphians altered their forms into configurations designed for maximum lifting power, and still couldn't shift the hammer even a millimeter. Finally, it was Maya's turn. She approached the hammer with that same casual gait Vex had noticed on her first day. She studied it for a moment, walked around it once, then shrugged and grabbed the handle with both hands, and lifted. The hammer rose from its pedestal as easily as if it were made of foam. The courtyard went absolutely silent. 347 students and 24 faculty members stood frozen, staring at the human who had just done the impossible. Maya looked down at the hammer in her hands, looked up at Vex, and said the most perfectly human thing possible. "Huh, that's weird." The hammer of burden hung in Maya Torres's hands like it weighed nothing at all, which was impossible. Completely, absolutely, fundamentally impossible. Vex felt his tendrils go numb. Around the courtyard, students and faculty alike stood frozen in various postures of shock. A Krolith student's jaw had literally dropped open, his massive mandibles hanging slack. Instructor Kelvin had dropped her datapad, and it lay on the ground making a sad beeping noise that nobody seemed to hear. Maya shifted her grip on the hammer, testing its weight. So, what exactly am I supposed to do with this? Is there like a target or something? Put it down, Vex managed to say, his voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. Put it down right now. Sure, okay. Maya lowered the hammer back onto its pedestal with a gentle thunk. The moment she released it, the gravitational sensors around the courtyard started screaming again, registering the impossible density that had returned. Did I do something wrong? You look kind of freaked out. Wrong? She had just violated several fundamental laws of physics, and she was asking if she did something wrong. Instructor Grax was the first to recover. He strode forward, all 4 arms flexing, and grabbed the hammer's handle with maximum force. It didn't budge, not even a tremor. He released it, stepped back, and stared at Maya with something that might have been fear or awe, or both mixed together. Try again, Grax commanded. Maya blinked. Really? I thought we were done. Lift it again. Now. She shrugged and picked up the hammer. Again, it rose, as if gravity had simply forgotten to apply to her. She held it aloft with both hands, then switched to one hand, testing. It's actually pretty light. Maybe there's something wrong with your sensors? Could be a calibration issue. A calibration issue. She thought the ancient mystery that had baffled scientists for 3 centuries was a calibration issue. Swing it, Vex said, his mind racing through possibilities. Telekinesis? No, humans didn't have that ability. Gravity manipulation? The sphere had detected 0 energy manipulation capability. What in the name of the founders was happening? Maya looked around the courtyard, found an empty space, and gave the hammer an experimental swing. It moved through the air with a sound like reality tearing, leaving a faint shimmer in its wake. When she brought it to a stop, the gravitational sensors briefly registered readings that made absolutely no sense. Negative mass, folded space, dimensions that shouldn't exist. This feels really good, actually, Maya said, giving it another swing. Great balance. Who made this thing? We don't know, Instructor Vex said, finally finding her voice. The civilization that created it died out millions of years ago. The inscriptions on the temple where it was found roughly translate to, "Only the worthy may bear the burden of protection." We've tested it with every species in the galaxy. No one has ever moved it. No one. Well, someone must have moved it originally, right? Otherwise, how did it get to that temple? The logic was sound, but it missed the point entirely. The point was that Maya Torres, ranked dead last in her class, weakest student in Institute history, had just accomplished what every warrior, scientist, and scholar had failed to do for centuries. I need to report this to the council, Vex said, activating his communicator. Torres, you will remain in the courtyard. Do not leave. Do not touch anything else. Just stand there. Can I put the hammer down first? Yes, fine. Put it down. She set it back on the pedestal, and once again it became immovable. Vex watched as 3 Krolith students immediately tried to lift it, just to confirm. Nothing. It might as well have been welded to the planet's core. The next few hours were chaos, and Vex meant that in the most literal sense. Council members arrived via emergency transport. Scientists appeared with equipment Vex had never seen before. The courtyard was sealed off, declared a research zone, and flooded with personnel asking questions. Maya sat on a bench near the hammer, answering the same questions over and over. No, she didn't feel anything unusual. No, she hadn't trained for this. No, she had no idea why she could lift it. Yes, she was absolutely certain she was fully human, with no genetic modifications. Vex stood with Grax and Kelvin, watching the circus unfold. "This changes everything," Kelvin said quietly. "If humans can interact with ancient technology that we cannot, if they possess some quality that we've overlooked." "One human," Grax corrected. "One human can lift one specific object. We don't know if this applies to all humans or just her. But we have to consider the implications. The hammer is believed to be Forerunner technology. If humans have some connection to the Forerunners..." Vex held up a tendril for silence. "Let's not leap to conclusions. We need data. We need tests. We need to understand what actually happened here before we start rewriting galactic history." Counselor Thrain arrived an hour later, his scaled form moving with the confidence of someone who had commanded fleets. He spoke briefly with the research team, examined the hammer himself, and then walked directly to Maya. "Miss Torres," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "I am Counselor Thrain. I signed your acceptance letter to this institute." Maya stood up quickly. "Oh, thank you for that. I know my scores weren't exactly impressive, but I really appreciate the opportunity to—" "I knew this would happen," Thrain interrupted. The courtyard went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. "Excuse me?" Maya said. "I knew you would be able to lift the hammer. That's why I accepted your application." Vex felt his tendrils curl in confusion. "Counselor, with respect, how could you possibly have known?" Thrain didn't look at Vex. His eyes remained fixed on Maya. "Because 30 years ago, I led an expedition to Earth. This was before official first contact, before your species even knew we existed. We were investigating reports of unusual quantum signatures coming from your solar system. What we found was far more interesting than quantum anomalies." He paused, and Vex realized that every person in the courtyard was holding their breath. "We found humans. Not just any humans, but humans who had somehow bonded with Forerunner artifacts that we had been tracking. A woman in your African continent was using what we later identified as a Forerunner power core as a good luck charm. A child in Asia had turned a Forerunner navigation device into a toy. Your species couldn't identify what these objects were, but you could use them. You could touch them without harm, activate them without understanding, carry them without being destroyed by their power." Maya sat back down slowly. "That sounds like a huge coincidence." "That's what we thought at first. But we investigated further. Discreetly. We found 17 separate instances of humans interacting successfully with Forerunner technology across your planet. Technology that kills or drives insane any other species that attempts to use it. Your people just picked these things up and incorporated them into your lives without even realizing what they were." "So, what? Humans are special? That seems kind of unlikely, given that we're ranked lowest in pretty much every physical category." Thrain made a sound that the translator identified as laughter. "Miss Torres, the Forerunners weren't interested in physical strength. They were the most advanced civilization the galaxy has ever known. They could have built their technology to respond to strength, or speed, or tactical thinking. But they didn't. They built it to respond to something else. Something that we still don't fully understand. And you think humans have this something else? I know you do. The question is why? What quality do humans possess that allows them to interface with technology designed by beings who ascended beyond physical existence millions of years ago?" Maya looked down at her hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. "I don't feel special. I feel like I'm failing constantly." "By our metrics, you are failing," Thrain agreed. "You are weaker, slower, and less capable than every other student here. But clearly, we're measuring the wrong things. Vex stepped forward. Counselor, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we've been training warriors to fight like we fight, using strength, speed, energy manipulation, all the tools that conventional species possess. But the Forerunners fought differently. They didn't conquer with force. They protected with wisdom. The inscriptions on the hammer translate to, "Only the worthy may bear the burden of protection." We assumed worthy meant strong. We were wrong. Then what does it mean? Kelvin asked. Thrain looked at Maya again. Miss Torres, why did you come to this institute? The truth, please. Maya took a deep breath. My planet is defenseless. We've got nukes, sure, but compared to what's out here in the galaxy, we're nothing. If someone decided to invade Earth tomorrow, we couldn't stop them. I came here because I wanted to learn how to protect my home. Even if I washed out, even if I failed every test, I'd at least learn something useful. Take it back with me. Maybe train others. You came here to protect your species, knowing you would likely fail? Yeah, I mean someone had to try, right? Thrain turned to address the assembled crowd. The hammer responds to purpose, not power. To dedication, not dominance. The Forerunners built their technology to serve those who would sacrifice themselves for others, who would bear the burden of protection even when the odds were impossible. They built it for humans. The implications crashed through Vex's mind like a meteor impact. If this was true, if humans could access Forerunner technology, then Earth wasn't a primitive backwater. It was potentially the most strategically important planet in the galaxy. We need to run more tests, one of the scientists said. Verify these claims. Study her physiology, her neural patterns, her... No, Maya said firmly, standing up. Look, I get that this is all super interesting, but I didn't come here to be a lab experiment. I came here to learn combat training. Can I do that? Or are you going to poke at me with instruments for the next 6 months? Thrain smiled. You can continue your training. In fact, I'm authorizing a curriculum modification. You will work with our Forerunner technology specialists. Learn what we know about their artifacts. If humans truly can interface with this technology, then you need to understand what you're dealing with. Does this mean I'm not ranked last anymore? Maya asked hopefully. You are still ranked 347 out of 347, Vex said, unable to help himself. The sphere measures physical capabilities. Those haven't changed. Right. Cool. Still dead last. At least I'm consistently bad at stuff. Despite himself, despite the galaxy-shaking revelations of the past few hours, Vex felt his tendrils curl in what might have been amusement. The human had just proven herself capable of wielding ancient technology that no one else could touch, and she was worried about her class ranking. The crowd began to disperse. Scientists reluctantly packed up their equipment. Council members departed to wherever council members went to discuss matters of galactic importance. Eventually, only Vex, Grax, and Maya remained in the courtyard with the hammer. So what happens now? Maya asked. Now you train, Grax rumbled. Same as before. You still can't lift standard weapons properly. You still fail most physical tests. The hammer doesn't change that. But I can lift the hammer? Yes, which means you need to learn how to use it. Report to Training Ground 7 tomorrow at 0500. We're adding weapons training to your schedule. Maya's face did something complicated. 5 in the morning? That's an hour earlier than usual. Problem? No, sir. I'll be there. She left the courtyard, and Vex watched her go. Still walking with that same confident stride, still apparently unbothered by being ranked. Last, still showing up ready to work, despite knowing she would fail most of what she attempted. Grax, Vex said quietly. What do you make of all this?" The massive Krolith was silent for a long moment. "I think the galaxy is about to change, and I think that human is going to be at the center of it, whether she wants to be or not. She still ranks last in her class. For now. But we're not measuring the right things, are we? We never have been." The next 6 months were unlike anything Vex had experienced in his entire career. Maya Torres continued to rank 347 out of 347 in traditional metrics. She still couldn't lift standard weapons effectively. She still failed strength tests. She still struggled with basic physical requirements. But she could wield the hammer. And not just wield it. She could fight with it. Grax worked with her daily, developing forms and techniques that no one had ever seen because no one had ever been able to lift the weapon before. She was clumsy at first, her human reflexes not quite up to the task. But she improved. Slowly, frustratingly, incrementally, she got better. More importantly, she started finding other Forerunner artifacts in the Institute's archives. Objects that had been labeled as decorative or non-functional because no one could activate them. Maya touched them, and they came to life. A shield generator that projected barriers of folded space. A scanner that could detect life forms through solid matter. A communication device that could translate any language instantly. Even dead ones. The galaxy's understanding of human potential shifted dramatically. Earth, which had been dismissed as a backwater world, was suddenly receiving diplomatic overtures from a dozen major powers. The Council authorized a formal alliance. Trade negotiations began. Defense pacts were proposed. And Maya just kept showing up to class, ranking last, and trying her best. The final assessment arrived with typical military efficiency. Every student would face a combat trial against a live opponent. Victory wasn't required, competency was. Show that you had learned. Show that you could apply your training. Show that you deserve to graduate. Maya Torres was scheduled to fight last. Of course she was. Ranked 347. She would go last. Vex watched as student after student completed their assessments. Most passed. A few failed. The standard distribution that occurred every year. When Maya's name was called, she entered the combat ring carrying the Hammer of Burden. Her opponent was a mid-ranked Krolith named Vorn. Strong, but not exceptional. Fast, but not remarkable. The match began. Vorn charged immediately, using his superior size and strength to close distance. Maya sidestepped, swung the hammer in a wide arc that forced Vorn to retreat. He circled, looking for an opening. Maya tracked him, her form imperfect but functional. Vorn feinted left, attacked right. Maya blocked with the hammer's shaft, was driven backward by the impact. She recovered, countered with an overhead strike that Vorn barely dodged. The hammer hit the ground and created a small crater, gravitational sensors registering impossible forces. They fought for 3 minutes. Vorn was faster, stronger, more experienced. Maya was determined, adaptable, stubborn. Neither could gain a decisive advantage. Finally, Grax called time. The match ended in a draw. Maya returned to the waiting area, breathing hard, covered in sweat. Vex approached her with his datapad. "Torres," he said, "your final ranking is 347 out of 347. She laughed breathlessly. "Consistently terrible until the end. At least I'm predictable." "However," Vex continued, "you have demonstrated competency with Forerunner technology that no other student possesses. You have shown the ability to adapt under pressure, to persist despite failure, and to elevate those around you through your actions. You pass." Maya's eyes widened. "I pass? Like, actually pass? Graduate from the Institute? You graduate ranked last in your class, but you graduate." She whooped. An odd human sound of celebration, and pumped her fist in the air. Other students looked over, some with confusion, others with what might have been respect. Counselor Thrain appeared beside Vex, seemingly materializing from nowhere the way council members often did. "Miss Torres," Thrain said, "congratulations on your graduation. I have an offer for you." "An offer?" "The council is forming a new division, Forerunner Technology Integration. We need someone to lead it, someone who can actually use the artifacts we've been studying for centuries, someone who understands both human perspective and galactic military doctrine. The position is yours if you want it." Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled that particularly human smile. "Will I still be ranked last?" "There are no rankings in research divisions, only results." "Then I accept, on one condition." "Name it." "I want to recruit other humans for the program. Train them here at the Institute. Show them what I learned. Because someone has to be first. But they shouldn't have to be alone." Thrain nodded. "Agreed. Welcome to Galactic Defense, Commander Torres." Vex watched as the human who ranked last in her class was promoted to a position that technically outranked him. The irony was not lost on him. The human who couldn't lift standard weapons, who failed basic strength tests, who struggled with every physical requirement, was now in charge of humanity's integration into galactic military structures. And somehow, it made perfect sense. Because the Forerunners had been right. Strength wasn't what mattered. Speed wasn't what mattered. What mattered was showing up, even when you knew you would fail. What mattered was trying anyway. What mattered was bearing the burden of protection, not because you were the strongest, but because someone had to do it. Humans understood that in a way that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Maya Torres walked out of the Institute that day, ranked 347 out of 347, and the galaxy would never underestimate humanity again.